As far as we know, Antoninus Pius reigned over a multi-decade period of general peace and tranquility, and he reared Marcus Aurelius from a teenager into the man who would take over the empire. But as we talked about last time, there was another man, Lucius Verus, also promised to be an emperor. The Roman Senate went with Marcus Aurelius. But was it possible to just ignore Lucius Verus? To say the situation was awkward would be an understatement. Adding to this unconventional transfer of power was the fact that Rome's old nemesis, Parthia, was making noise in Armenia, a territory that was often disputed between Rome and the Parthians. As we'll see in this episode, an all-out war between Rome and Parthia would follow. But first, Rome had to sort out who was going to lead the empire. We'll start there on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 49, Parthia Strikes Back. Hi there, just a short programming note. Next week I will be traveling and won't be able to put out an episode, but I encourage you to check out my talk at the York Festival of Ideas. It's available on YouTube. It talks about the Antonine Plague, which is what we will talk about when the podcast resumes. All right, on to the episode. The succession plan of Hadrian reached its final conclusion in March of AD 161. When Hadrian died, Antoninus Pius took over, but then when Antoninus Pius died, both Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus were still alive. As we talked about in the last episode, Marcus Aurelius was the heavy favorite between the two men. Lucius Verus had served as consul twice, but was unmarried, was young, and just simply lacked the preparation that Marcus had enjoyed. Marcus had not only served as consul twice, he had imperium, he had the right to command Rome's legions, he had the title Caesar, and he had the hand of Antoninus Pius's daughter, with whom he had produced several children. So when Antoninus Pius died, the Senate turned to Marcus, and perhaps Marcus alone. Now, the way that the sources portray this whole situation is interesting. They universally claim that Marcus was just so dutiful to Antoninus Pius and Hadrian that he refused to take office unless Lucius Verus was given equal power. That might be true, but it's easy to imagine another scenario. Lucius Verus may have been young, may have been less favored than Marcus, but he was much beloved by the soldiers, and Marcus had spent his entire life following Antoninus Pius around with the ceremonial trappings of authority, but his health was not particularly good, his military training was subpar, and perhaps he lacked the full endorsement of Rome's legions. In which case, Marcus could not ignore the fact that Lucius had a legitimate claim to be emperor. And it may not have even been good enough to make Lucius his heir. Lucius needed to have full and equal authority with Marcus, or perhaps the empire would have descended into some form of civil war. No source says this, but I happen to think this is the most plausible scenario. And it may be that it was dressed up in the language of Marcus being a benefactor to Lucius, but in reality, there was no other option that would preserve peace in the Roman Empire. And so both men took office in March of AD 161. Despite the fact that the two emperors were nominally equal, I imagine that everybody recognized that Marcus was clearly the senior and Lucius was clearly the junior emperor. Marcus was Lucius Verus's patron. He had greater authority. He had been groomed for office. He was Pontifex Maximus, by the way, and Lucius Verus wasn't. Marcus was married with kids. And the very same year that the two emperors take over, Marcus's wife Faustina bore him 2 twin sons. Now, one of them would not survive. The other, Commodus, would. There are coins produced at this time showing Faustina surrounded by children with an inscription that we might essentially translate as the blessings of the times, or the great times are here, something like that. The Roman Senate also was very happy during this time, at least according to some sources. We're told that Marcus deferred to the Senate often, gave them jurisdiction over themselves, kept senators close by him, took their counsel seriously, listened to them. And even when senators behaved corruptly or badly, Marcus moved the trials into a private rather than public setting so that the dignity of the Senate could be protected. Meanwhile, in the east of the empire, the Parthian king Vulgaces decided to invade Rome's client state of Armenia almost immediately after the two men took office. He probably thought that there either was a civil war or was about to be a civil war, and this would be his opportunity to take a territory in Armenia that had historically been Parthia's and only recently had gone into the hands of the Romans. He wanted it back. And besides, there was only a single Roman legion nearby in Cappadocia. This is a province in Central Asia Minor. The governor of that province decided to act on his own initiative, taking his legion into Armenia, but this turned out to be a foolish move. He was surrounded, his legion was destroyed, and the governor ended up committing suicide. The campaign lasted less than a week and ended in an ignominious defeat for Rome. And so Lucius Verus went off to the eastern half of the Roman Empire, setting up his base in Antioch. Now, for at least the first few years, that was really the extent of Lucius's involvement. Here's what one ancient source claims about Lucius Verus in Antioch. Quote, "His reputation was besmirched not only by the license of an unbridled life, but also by adulteries and by love affairs with young men. He used to dice the whole night through. He so rivaled Caligula, Nero, and Vitellius in their vices as to wander about at night through the taverns and brothels with only a common traveling cap for a head covering, revel with various rowdies, and engage in brawls. He held gladiatorial bouts rather frequently at his banquets, and after continuing the meal far into the night, he would fall asleep on the banqueting couch so that he had to be lifted up along with the covers and carried to his bedroom." That's the Augustan History's life of Lucius Verus. In some ways, it's hard to blame Lucius Verus for wandering into temptation. The city of Antioch was a bustling eastern capital, full of all manner of diversions and license. Mark Antony spent time in Antioch basically doing the same thing, with Cleopatra there at his side. Lucius did not have a Cleopatra with him, but we are told he spent a lot of time with a Greek woman named Parthia, and he evidently was obsessed with this woman. But when Marcus sent his daughter Lucilla to Lucius Verus, he got his act together. It was Lucius's duty to marry Marcus's 14-year-old daughter and cement the connection between Rome's two emperors. During these first few years of the war, Rome's efforts against Parthia were essentially at a stalemate. We're told that he went on hunting trips and visited coastal estates on what seemed like a country holiday, not a fight against one of Rome's oldest and most formidable enemies. In a letter between Lucius Verus and Fronto, Lucius actually calls his time in Antioch, quote, "this country holiday of mine." That's a direct quotation from Lucius Verus. And he laments in the same letter that this country holiday was, quote, "saddled with state business." That is the small matter of the Parthian War. In the year 163, Roman soldiers successfully recaptured Armenia, and Lucius Verus, despite the fact that he never attended a single battle, was given the name of a conqueror, Armeniacus, conqueror of Armenia. In another letter that Lucius wrote to Fronto, He asked that Fronto write a history of the Parthian War, which made it clear that Lucius was the reason for the war's eventual success. Again, this is a direct quote from Lucius Verus. What an interesting guy. Quote, "You should dwell at length on the causes and early stages of the war, and especially our ill successes in my absence. Do not be in a hurry to come to my share. Further, I think it essential to make quite clear the great superiority of the Parthians before my arrival, that the magnitude of my achievements may be manifest." That's one of Lucius's letters to Fronto. This is from a man who set not one of his imperial feet in Parthian territory. It is true that the fortunes of the war turned around AD 164, but not because of Lucius Verus. Really, the man that seems to be the hero of the hour was the general Avidius Cassius. And again, you should remember that name. Avidius Cassius marched with the wing of the Roman army that went down the Euphrates. And during the summer of AD 165, he utterly destroyed Parthian resistance along that river, making it all the way down to the twin cities of Seleucia and Ctesiphon. These were major cities. Seleucia had something like 300,000 people. It was an amazingly cosmopolitan and wealthy city, administered by Greeks with a large Greek population. Seleucia wanted no quarrel with the Romans, and so they opened their gates to the Roman army, but Avidius Cassius either was unable to control his troops or he just commanded them to do what followed, and that was a complete sacking of the city. Avidius Cassius's army would winter in the area and then early the next year march down into Mesopotamia and take the rest of that territory. And Rome would claim victory. And they were right to. The Parthians did not recover from this war. That dynasty ends up going out of power. A new one would take over a few decades later. What this war did, supposedly, was further open up the land and sea routes in the Indian Ocean and the Silk Roads, connecting the Roman Empire with Persia, the Kushan Empire in Central Asia, and even the Han Chinese Empire. We know that people from the Mediterranean and people from China had contact during this period, not from Roman records, but from Chinese ones. The Chronicle of the Han Empire, the Hu Han Shu, records the scene in the court of the emperor when several men claiming to be ambassadors from Rome entered the court of the emperor. Quote, "The king of the Roman Empire always wanted to send envoys to the Han, but Parthia, wishing to control the trade in multicolored Chinese silks, blocked the route to prevent the Romans going through to China. In the 9th year, during the reign of Emperor Huan, the king of the Roman Empire, Andun," this is, by the way, a name for Marcus Aurelius, "sent envoys from beyond the frontiers through Renan," that's a name for the central eastern Vietnamese coast, "to offer elephant tusks, rhinoceros horn, and turtle shell. This was the very first time there was direct communication between the two countries. The tribute brought was neither precious nor rare, raising suspicions that the account of the envoys might be exaggerated." Now that is the Hu Han Shu. What almost certainly happened is that some merchants from Egypt got blown off course, past Vietnam, or got lost, and found their way into the court of the emperor. They feared for their lives, and so they made up a story that they were envoys from the emperor. And that explains why they had goods from what appeared to be the East African coast. But the point isn't whether their story is true or not. The point is the connectivity of Eurasia at this time was very high. And of course, such robust connections between people over vast distances are likely to bring disease. And indeed, Avidius Cassius's soldiers that marched down the Euphrates supposedly encountered a pestilence there. And though the Romans defeated their age-old adversary, what seems to have overshadowed that victory is the pandemic that followed, the Antonine Plague. a disease outbreak that would last over a decade. And as we'll see in the next episode, this disease was a crucial ingredient in the tumult that began the death throes of the Pax Romana.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocor. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.